want to talk first about the big tax bill that recently passed. CBO estimates that federal spending on Medicaid in Maryland will be slashed by $16 billion. What can lawmakers in the state do to compensate for that loss?
Well, it's a real limited ability to compensate for that loss. My wife is on the county council for Prince George's County. My middle son, I've got 5 sons and a daughter. The middle one is in the Annapolis. He's in the General Assembly. And they're both having, funding crises right now, too. So to pass it to the state and local level, which apparently is some of the thinking behind what my Republican colleagues did, in a state like Maryland is a dead end. So we'll try and find ways to support it, but the funding is going to be limited. So what you're going to have is, especially with respect to Medicaid, you're going to have people that get kicked off the rolls and don't get certain types of health care anymore. You'll have, sometimes there'll be medical facilities that shut down, whether they're hospitals or urgent care facilities or whatever. More likely, though, for many of them is they'll shed units that are less profitable than others, or that they think carry more risk, like OBGYN. So I think that's what's going to happen in the short run. People are going to, whether people connect the dots, because it won't be immediate. The Republican strategy of pushing it down the road, I think, is something we have to make sure that we keep on the public's mind. And doing it so it comes after the midterm, I think what we have to do as Democrats is say, use it for campaign fodder. Cancel the cuts needs to be the mantra we run on, I think, so that they remember that they have yet another opportunity to reverse what was done, or at least to try.
How concerned are you that Democrats won't be able to leverage the deep cuts, the dead end that you mentioned, especially to Medicaid, to SNAP? They won't be able to leverage that enough in 2026 to flip the House and the Senate.
I'm not very worried about that, I must say. And we can't be overconfident, but I think the public's going to be able to connect those dots. And there's so many of them, too. We keep hearing about more of them. The day before we got in the car, I heard they're cutting funding for after-school programs. So, for many parents out there who last year, they were picking up junior they couldn't pick them up at 3 because they had to keep working. I don't know what they're going to do. And they're giving them like 5 minutes notice because this is the end of July. So there are going to be little landmines like that keep popping up over and over again. And I think with tariffs, other things that Trump's done, tariffs is one of the worst, I think. From a Republican standpoint, I really don't understand what the thinking was there. I thought what he would do was focus on China and the technology piece, because we really are getting robbed blind by the Chinese with respect to technology. But to put tariffs on every country, on every good, everywhere at the same time is nuts. And then doing that at the same time, you're alienating our allies, whether it's in the EU or Canada or Mexico, and now Brazil, and we're getting into these trade wars. I think that'll lead to prices going up, and people aren't going to like that. The answer about getting two dolls at Christmas, if that's what happens to people, they got to cut back on the toys they get their kids. It's going to be a major problem for the Republicans as they come towards that. So we'll see if they try and avoid driving off the cliff. But right now, that's what they're doing.
You said as far as the midterms, you don't want to be overconfident. Earlier at the Hill Nation Summit, your colleague Ted Lieu said that he expects the House to flip to the Democrats in the midterms. Do you share that same sense of confidence? And if you were a betting man, what percentage chance do you think Democrats have to win the House?
I mean, I think it's really high that we should be able to win the House back, in part because of the historic dynamic of a president losing control frequently of the House as a midterm election. I think the mistakes he's making, and the public's getting it. I mean, this bill, H.R. 1, last I looked was underwater 21 points. And he's even starting to slip on the immigration issue, which I think he's in the negative on now. And I think he's got the lowest rating of any president at this point in the second term. So he's hurting himself a lot. And I don't know, he's a very stubborn guy. I don't know if he's going to try and correct it. And he doesn't have Republicans that are steering him in a different direction. They're kind of going along with him by and large. So I don't know that it changes. Now, to Rose's point, though, a minute ago, if we layer on top, we being the Democrats, layer on top of that an affirmative message, and there's a lot to correct, so in a way, just correcting what he's done becomes an affirmative message, right? But if we can put other pieces to that, we could really have very strong gains. I'm not going to say we're going to pick up the Senate, but if they stay on this track, it could be in play.
I want to talk to you a little bit about that messaging. You said recently that your constituents who overwhelmingly voted for Vice President Harris in last year's White House race are angry, but you said, quote, "We have to channel that anger in the right way with a focus on 2026. What would you consider, how would you describe the right way to channel that anger?
Well, part of what we were getting, and there's still some of this now, is do something immediately. So there are people that want immediate results. And, you know, if you saw my town hall meeting clips, it's like, go get arrested. It's, you know, go do protest things and the like. And all of that's fine. Well, I'm not going to get arrested in the short run anyway. But you know, the protest politics, which can be effective, and we're seeing some of that in LA, frankly, but it has to be aimed at the midterms, right? It has to be mobilizing voters who are angry about what he's doing. And in that instance, in part, it's immigration issues and the ICE sweeps and all of that stuff, which seem to be getting worse by the day. But if it's connected to that, then it can be very strong. The mobilization piece can grow out of that, and I think we're seeing that already. If you want to turn voters out, get them angry, get them excited, and here he's got both of those going on at the Democratic side. So we'll see if we can sustain it, but I think it's certainly heading in the right direction for us at this point.
You said you don't plan to get arrested in the near term, but you said recently that you would be willing to get arrested. How do you think you balance, you know, possibly, you know, getting arrested, that kind of civil disobedience, being strategic and effective versus being seen as performative?
Well, it is performative. I mean, it really is. So the rest of the quote was, I got arrested when I was at Princeton. We were protesting apartheid investments by the university. And it was performative, and we made the New York Times, and we were all excited about it. And it did get the point out there. But the performance has to be connected with results. The civil rights movement, which is also performative, Birmingham, Selma, all of those were performative efforts. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. They were enormously effective, but they were all aimed at the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and all of those things came along in part because of their efforts and also in part because LBJ and to some extent the work that was done on the Hill were moving it in that direction. So, but if you can get it so it's all working together, it can be enormously powerful.
Do you think Democrats right now have a unifying message going into the midterm elections? And if so, what is that message?
Well, kind of, like I was saying a minute ago, reversing what just has been done is going to be a strong and unifying message. And one of the things that's interesting about today, I don't always agree with my colleagues who think there has to be that one, you know, what is it, we're the change we've been waiting for, you know, or yes, we can. I don't know that you have to have those kind of slogans anymore. It's great to have it, but the media piece is so diffuse now that people are getting their news and their information and making political decisions that aren't hearing your message like that at all. They're not watching, no offense, a lot of the TV talking heads and the TV news. They're getting it off, you know, the Rogan podcast or, you know, some sports station that they listen to where they happen to talk about something on the side about it. And we need to make sure we're filling all of those too. And there's a lot of stuff. Trump has been uniquely, well, destructive in so many different ways that you could just pick one and stay with. You know, we could have a Medicaid-specific message and just do that for a year and a half. You could have a rule of law violations message and do that for a year and a half. You could have a corruption message and do that for a year and a half easily. And I think all of those things need to be presented, but they don't all have to come from one source. And none of us, we got 200 plus, you know, Democrats in the House and Senate together. we can speak in different ways to different media outlets and different communities and get different messages across. There can be overarching messages too, but just getting the point out there is a very big one. And then the affirmative messages, man, some of them are, if he stays on the track where he's sort of undermining our relationships with our allies around the world and withdrawing our influence, part of the message could quickly turn into, we've had a Sputnik moment with China. We need to catch up. And that's going to be true, I think, on the diplomatic front. That could potentially be true on the military front, given what he's done with Russia. I wouldn't be surprised if China did some things that could put the White House in a difficult situation. And then the cuts to science and technology and education and research and development are going to set us back a generation, I think, easily. So I think all of those things, and we could do more of them, but, it's frustrating to think it through, frankly. But that's the damage he's done in 6 months.
You raised some eyebrows, I would say, a few months ago when you said that it may be time for Senate Democrats to, quote, get a new leader. Do you still feel that there should be perhaps a change among Democratic leadership?
Well, the Schumer comment was sort of that one. We'll see. I think we've got some votes coming up, some bills that we'll have to think through how to play them as we get there. But I'd say my worst fears have come to pass. Part of my concern then was if we didn't do something, we being the Democrats on Capitol Hill, do something to draw a line. And that was the vote where we still had the filibuster that could have derailed potentially the CR that the Senate ended up moving through. And we don't have any of those kinds of barriers to votes in the House. So it just flew through. And there's a ripple effect that comes with that, that we're going to be feeling for at least another year, I think. Hopefully, there's a sense that, I think the argument was, well, if we do that, it'll be easier for the Trump administration to lay off government employees, a shutdown. He's had no trouble laying off government employees based on that. To some extent, the courts have slowed him down, but even the Supreme Court's pulling back from the preliminary injunctions that they put in place. USAID doesn't even exist anymore. It's, 2 blocks that way? Basically, I guess there's something in, statutory about it, but all the employees are gone, the building is gone. They're talking about filling it with the FBI. And, the rescissions provision, it looks like they're going to pull PEPFARs out of there. I sure hope so, because if they don't, millions of people will die. But that's all happened since that vote. And, I don't think the position they took helped the Democratic Party or helped the country.
Do you think that term limits are part of that conversation? One thing I've noticed, particularly among the DC area lawmakers, is the age issue. Your colleague, Maryland Congressman Steny Hoyer, is 86. He would be running for his 24th term in office. Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia sadly passed away. He was in his 70s. He was battling cancer. DC Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton is 88. You're practically a tween in Congress. You're 64 years old.
I'm part of the youth movement.
Yeah, there you go. Do you think Democrats should be passing the torch to a younger generation?
I think it depends on who it is. I was just marveling about, Nancy Pelosi, who was 87, somewhere in there. But, I asked her a question. I guess I can't put out what the conversation was, but it was like, yeah. She instantly went back to it's a piece of legislation. And she was just like, bang, 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 bang. This is what we did. This is how it passed. This is what happened in the Senate. This is what you should do now. And I was like, yeah. So 87, 47, whatever that number is, it's still at the top. It's still the A game. Now, if people have slipped, that's another story. But, I think it's a tricky path to go down. So, term limits, I think, don't work because they're not connected to age or competence, really. It's just when did you get there and get started. So you could have really young people. Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer would have been gone under that. Like, I don't know. They had 8 years that Matt Gaetz was proposing. Consider the source. And, you know, they would have been gone 30 years ago. And I don't know that the nation would be better for that. Jim Clyburn was speaking at one of our caucus meetings today. Brilliant. And the fact that he could recall, it was actually about John Lewis's anniversary of his death this week. And he was talking about when he met John Lewis and their first meeting with Martin Luther King when they were trying to make a decision about how they should proceed in Selma. And the issue was whether Dr. King should show up and be part of that effort or not. Now, you know, he's been here 32 years, I think. I thought that was a really important piece of information to hear, and having that historical perspective helps. So I'm not big on term limits for legislators, or even, I guess the executive branch makes sense because of the accumulation of power that you can get. And man, is that true now? I just thought about how applicable that would be to this administration. But I'm not a big fan of that. And certainly the age piece, I think, is overblown.
A question that's typically reserved for maybe your female colleagues has to do with family. And you mentioned you're the father of 6. How do you balance your job, your role in Congress, with 6 kids?
Yeah, you're right. That is typically reserved for the female. And my wife is in office, as I mentioned earlier. The way she did it was after the youngest one got to be 8 or so, she'd stayed home and, you know, was working on raising them because she hit, after like the second kid, it was just not cost effective to keep working. And she had been working. Her first job in politics was for Ben Cardin on his press secretary when he was on the House side. So there's another one going back a ways. But she did 15 years, and then she decided he was going to go to school, and then she decided to run for office. And she ran and won the race for the House of Delegates. So I think that was one way. And then when she was running that first time, you know, and I was state's attorney at the time, I sort of cut back so that she could be out there more. The other time that I did that too was when she ran for lieutenant governor. And I was in private practice then, but, you know, I'm home cooking and doing all that, much to my children's chagrin. They got tired of pizza. That's how bad it was. They put their money together and bought a cookbook. So, you know, it might have been cruelty to children in a later era at this point. But you know, you try and balance that out. But I mean, at this point in my life, my kids are grown. She's out living the same political life, you know, the work-life balance thing. I don't have hobbies. I don't play golf. We do Sunday dinners with the families because all 6 are in the area. They'll come over on Sundays. But other than that, I mean, I love my job. I love my work. And I feel that this is a pivotal moment historically, and I'm committing myself to it.
We're about to wrap up, so final question. You mentioned your wife, Jolene, who's a Prince George's County Council member. Your son, Julian, is a Maryland state delegate. Your family has been described as a political dynasty. So my question is, what advice about politics do you give your family, and what advice does your family give you?
Well, I always like to say we're like the Kennedys, but without the money. So, you know. Well, I mean, one of the things I've always tried to do is make sure I don't pressure my kids to do anything one way or the other. So my dream as a kid was to play in the NBA, as Chris would have told you. We talked about that when we did our piece together. Obviously, I didn't make it. I didn't push any of my kids to do basketball because they're a little taller than me, but not tall enough.
Wait, how tall are you?
I'm 5'9".
With the basketball dream? All right.
With the basketball
Okay.
dream. Well, there's a guy, you won't know this, but Spud Webb. How many of y'all know Spud Webb? Yeah. So Spud was playing at NC State. He was 5'6", I think. And he could do two-hand reverse dunks. So I'm going out watching the ACC, and I'm like, I can be that guy. It's still within range. I just saw a clip, actually. He's my age. He's like 60-something. He can still do that. Yeah, they showed a clip of him doing it. Maybe it was AI. I don't know.
You never know these days.
But, you know, the thing is, you all do your thing. The one who is in office now, Jolene had him doing like a little local play thing. And one of the older girls in the play had gotten an agent and got recruited to go do TV or something. And so he heard that. He was like 5 or something at the time. And he comes up to us. He says, I want an agent too. So I like pat him on the head and say like, okay, sure. So we take him to the agent. She hires him. She picks him up on the spot, right? And about 3 months later, he's at the Shakespeare Theater playing Kelly McGillis's son. And then he just kept working at it, culminated in, he was young Simba in Lion King on Broadway. Wow. Never had any expectation or thoughts about that happening, but, you know, support them, but stay out of their way, and it works out.
Have you officially given up on the basketball dream at this point, or could it still happen?
Yeah, I can just barely walk to the car at this point.
All right.
So, yeah.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.